Hi. So, those of you who enjoy listening to your tutorials or seeing them in ASL, this is the video for you. If you'd rather read, go ahead. You can just skip this video and read the article. Completely up to you. Today's tutorial topic is foundation paper piecing, prepping your pattern page. For foundation paper piecing, I tend to shorten it often to FPP. And the idea of this tutorial is that before you even start sewing, there are things you can do to set up your pattern page that will make your process easier once you get started. This picture is a literal snapshot photograph of what I did to prep my pattern, so you have the big picture idea. So I'm going to open with a metaphor that I thought of yesterday. Yesterday I was working on filming tutorials and setting everything up. I was trying to model how to set up your FPP pattern, and my computer had run out of disk space, and really just all of a sudden everything froze, crashed, stopped working. It was just completely, everything. Yeah, I lost some work. It was very frustrating. I took a break. I took my dog for a walk. I was super upset. So I was trying to just kind of let everything go. And during that process, I realized that is the perfect analogy for what I'm trying to do through this tutorial series with foundation paper piecing. A lot of people get overwhelmed. They're like, it's too hard. It doesn't work for my brain. I just can't figure it out. It doesn't work for me. It's too confusing. But in reality, the problem is that it's a very layered skill. So as you're learning this new and different process, if you're trying to make all of these multiple decisions at the same time, you can overwhelm your brain and your working memory. But if we can break all of the layers down and get things done in advance, so that when you're actually sewing, you're just focusing on the process of sewing, it's going to be a lot easier for you to enjoy and also internalize the process and understand the basics of foundation paper piecing. So that's my goal. And so my future tutorials on this topic will have a lot of tips and tricks that I don't expect you to use forever all of the time. There are some of them that I still do because they're part of my process and make things easier, faster, and more efficient for me. But the point is that now, if you practice each of these separately, individually, then through that process, you will naturally figure out which ones you want to continue to doing and which ones you don't need anymore because you understand the foundation paper piecing process. And throughout this series, I'm going to use a pattern of mine that I recently created, and it's of a tablet. Sometimes I will hand embroider Kindle on the bottom because it ends up looking like my Paperwhite Kindle, and I love to read. But it is a tablet block, and it's a free download, so help yourself. Just be sure that if you use it, once you click on the link, it's important to download it before printing. And go back and look at the tutorial that I created before this one that explains some important things to pay attention to as you're printing the pattern, just to be sure that everything prints to scale and exactly the way you want it to. So look at that older blog article. One thing to keep in mind as you look at the pattern, there are two different options. You can create a tablet that's tilted to the left or tilted to the right. But remember that the pattern is actually the reverse of the way it's going to end up looking. So make sure you follow the title that says tilted left or tilted right. Don't follow what it actually looks like because the fabric is going to end up on the other side. And if you don't want to use this pattern, use whatever you want to use. Just watch these videos and they will apply to any pattern that you want to make. And then if you're looking for other really simple patterns, there are two free patterns that are on Pattern Trace's website. That's the foundation paper piecing paper I prefer. There's an economy block, which is just cute. You can create a really cute fussy cut center and then add the corner pieces on. And then they also have a wonky log cabin quilt block that ends up being a super cute wonky log cabin block. So, those are two other free options, and I have the links posted here on the website. So scrolling down to this next part, my process for prepping your pattern prior to sewing involves 3 steps. First of all, you've chosen your fabrics and you're going to get colored pencils that match the main color of each of the fabric, and then just shade in a little squiggle on every single piece of the pattern that is going to ultimately have that color fabric. Because when you're sewing, I don't want your brain to be thinking at all about which fabric goes in this location. We're trying to eliminate that decision. We want you to just be able to look at the pattern and automatically know which fabric is going to match that part of the pattern. The second thing that we're going to do is extend some of our stitching lines into the seam allowance. Most pattern designers do not do this for you. And so being able to identify which of our seams we want to stitch all the way into the seam allowance and which ones we don't want to are important. I'm talking about the seam allowances along the edges of the pattern. So we want to go ahead and stitch those and mark them now. And that's going to be helpful because when you're actually sewing, you don't want to have to think about, is this the stitching line that I'm supposed to extend into the seam allowance? Or is this one of them that I don't have to? It's already there on the paper. You can just focus on learning how to foundation paper piece in that process. You don't have to worry about that decision in the moment. You don't technically have to stitch your seams all the way to the edge of the seam allowance, but I do strongly recommend it because what can happen is, especially on weird angled seams, you created the block, you stopped right at the edge of the line that the pattern designer has drawn, and then maybe you're adding a border, or maybe you've been stitching one segment of a multiple segment pattern. And so now it's time to sew that border on or sew the pattern pieces together. And what can happen is that part of the seam allowance that isn't stitched down can sometimes accidentally fold into the front side of your pattern. So you sew, and then when you open up the pattern, you see this little weird raw edged tab of fabric sticking out of your seam. Then you have to rip out the seam, tuck that tab back in, and re-sew. And again, our goal is for you to be successful. So if you stitch everything down and it's held in place, then you're not going to have a problem when you add your border or sew segment to segment together. An important note is I love to foundation paper piece on a tiny scale. It's one of my favorite things to do. And when you're doing tiny FPP, you're constantly fighting against seam bulk, because the more your seam is bulky, the more you're going to be able to see your stitches from the front. And this happens the most with things on a small scale. So reducing seam bulk, what you can do is if you reduce the number of seams into the seam allowance, you're going to have less thread buildup. So you're going to have seams that are less bulky. So if you only stitch the seams that you need to stitch, instead of stitching every seam into the seam allowance, you're going to reduce that thread buildup. And again, you're always going to start with the highest numbered pattern piece and work your way down. Watch the video for more instructions on what to do. And then as a result, you'll only have certain seams stitched down. You won't have a problem connecting it to other segments, and you also won't have thread buildup. So learn that habit now, and then later you can foundation paper piece anything, regardless of scale or the number of seams that are coming together without a problem. So at this point in the tutorial, I included a diagram that shows you exactly what you should do for my particular pattern. And if you watch this video, it will show you the process, and it has ASL and spoken English. Unfortunately, the resolution quality is not great. I was trying to film it in vertical format, and the settings that I created are not the best. I will improve that for later, but it's manageable. So watch that video. But if you don't want to watch the video, or if you want to reference just a picture after having watched the video, you can see this diagram. And on the computer, I've shaded things the way you are going to do with your colored pencils. So for example, here I have the gray frames on the tablets. And then I kind of did this weird rainbow thing to show the screen. And then on the edges, I have a green background on one side and the purple background on the other side. Again, look at the video to see just my hand drawing, because I literally just scribbling a couple colored lines in each pattern piece. But the point is to go ahead and shade things in. You know, it's not, you're not winning a coloring competition. You just want to automatically be able to look at that pattern piece and identify which of the fabrics you're going to use for that piece right away, automatically, without having to use your brain. And then on this diagram, you can also see in the corners in a hot pink line shade, I've added in the stitching segments that you're going to extend into the seam allowance. So at the top, it starts with piece number 13, and then at the bottom of 12 and the side of 11. And that is going to help you, on my particular pattern, know which seam allowances to stitch. Now, my pattern is pretty easy because it starts with a center section and then you build around the edges out from that. And Pattern Trace's Wonky Log Cabin Quilt Block is the same way. And it's good to start with those kind of patterns because they're easy, and it's also easier to identify which stitching lines you want to extend into the seam allowance. But the majority of patterns are not like this. So I included this pattern piece as an example for what you will most typically find in foundation paper piecing patterns or pattern segments. This is another pattern of mine that is an open book, and it is obviously not built in around from the center out. And so again, the principle is the same. You start with the highest number, which in this case is a 15, and you extend that seam allowance in both directions. You don't always extend it in both directions, but often your last piece does need to go in both directions. And so I added these hot pink stars to kind of show you where these are. So it's on 15, 14, 13, 12, 10, and then you jump to 6. Piece 7, 8, and 9 are not anywhere near the seam allowance, so you don't have to worry about those. So again, the highest number tends to go in both directions, and then you're going to work your way down from there in numerically descending order. And then once you find a piece that already has a line crossing it or blocking its way into the seam allowance, you stop. For example, here, my very first piece, piece number 1, I might make the mistake when I'm piecing it of extending that piece out into the seam allowance on the left-hand side. But because I've marked them ahead of time, I'll know that I don't need to extend it, and I'll know that I can avoid that thread buildup by only stitching the final seams that go over the pattern pieces on the block. So that is it for me today. On my next tutorial, I plan on showing you 3 different options for you to use to pre-cut your fabric pieces so that they're ready to go. I like to cut most of my fabric pieces in advance and organize them and clip them together so that when I'm actually sewing, I don't have to pull out the fabric, cut out the piece that's the right size, go back to sewing, pull out the fabric, cut. I can just keep sewing repetitively over and over and over because all the fabric pieces are pre-cut. And this will help you as well because it'll help you internalize the FPP process of sewing because you're not having to go back and forth between the tasks of cutting and sewing. And I have 3 options. It kind of depends on your personality, your style, and your goals. And so hopefully I'll get that out to you soon. If you enjoyed this video, please consider signing up for my blog. Because then you'll get an email heads up on when my next tutorial is posted. When you do sign up for my blog or website, you just type in your email address in the little box on my website, and then you have to actually confirm in an email that they send to you. And then also, I would love it if you could like or subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you.